Hello and welcome to another episode of the 905er podcast. I'm Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
One of the most important things we wanted to do when we launched this podcast was to help, in whatever small way we could, to amplify the voices of Indigenous people in the 905 region and to increase the level of understanding of urban Canadians of how we came to be in this land and what was done to the people who were here first. As it happens, just as the 905er began to record podcasts, there was also the nationwide outpouring of emotion arising from the uncovering of burial grounds of Indigenous children who were sent to the residential schools as part of an almost 200-year-long campaign to, in inverted commas, educate and legislate Indigenous culture out of existence. The purpose of the Indian Act and the residential schools was to pave the way for a Canada where Indigenous people, Indians in the language of the time, no longer existed. This was no secret to the First Nations, and nor were the burial grounds outside many residential schools. So it's grimly ironic that those who want to downplay the scale of genocidal intent behind Canadian government policy since before Confederation now throw the fact that the discoveries of 2020 and 2021 were sometimes already known back in the faces of the relatives of the disappeared and murdered, as if that changes anything. But on a much more positive note, at the same time as the history of the residential schools was exploding on the front pages of newspapers, two women in Halton were creating something new and unprecedented with the potential to do much to bring about a genuine knowledge of the truth and some really genuine reconciliation. And more importantly, to emphasise on bringing healing to all based on Indigenous treatments for, in their words, healing of the body, mind, soul and spirit while connecting to the land. Jody Harbour and Sherry Saevil are the two co-founders of Grandmother's Voice and the first urban Indigenous Center in Halton, but also a new kind of education and wellness centre where a collective of Indigenous women are providing programs that emphasise healing based on traditional methods, open to all. This includes a healing medicine garden, a wellness centre and a community garden. But as you'll hear in our conversation with Jody and Sherry, it seems like Grandmother's Voice has the potential to grow from its Halton origins into something of much wider importance.
I'd like to thank Sherry and Jody, with a Y, from Grandmother's Voice up here in Milton for inviting us to their lovely facility to record this first ever episode live on the ground episodes. So thank you very much, both of you, for inviting us here.
Thank you.
Why don't we start? Jody, I'm going to throw it open to you first. Why don't you just tell us a bit about what Grandmother's Voice is and what your purpose for being here is for those of our listeners who might not know about it.
We're a community organization, an Indigenous women-led organization, and it welcomes all people to come home. That's what our elders say is happening right now in society, is that people are finding their way home, and whether that be, an Indigenous person finding out that they're Indigenous or finding out the history of their family. But the reality is that all Canadians are really waking up to find out what their home is all about, and just really, we just wanted to create a safe space for people to come and belong, learn, grow, and heal.
And Sherry, before we hit record, we were talking a bit outside here. We were saying just, and here in Halton region in particular, there seems to be a real lack of anything like this existing, whereas we know that in Peel, Hamilton, even down Niagara region, there are Indigenous friendship centers that reach out to the communities that they serve. Why don't you tell us kind of the history kind of before and maybe after Grandmother's Voice came into existence?
Mm-hmm. I've been in my role. I work for the Halton Catholic District School Board as the Indigenous Education Advisor, and we were doing community events in schools and high schools, and there was really a need for that, and people really wanted to come and learn and be with us. So we were using high schools as a way of bringing people together, doing different workshops, and movies or guest speakers that would come. And it was called Halton Learning Lodge because it was a learning place for all of us to come together. We were promised space through different communities, organizations that we partnered with before, well, not partnered with, but had sat at those community tables. But it never came into fruition with those organizations. And then our school board had offered a space for us, and it was an independent space. And then COVID hit. And so we just kind of put those kinds of things on the back burner. And then we ended up getting a call from Jamie Reum, who is the CEO of Country Heritage Park, asking for a medicine garden. And we took the medicine garden to be more than a medicine garden. We not only built a medicine garden and had that beautiful medicine garden outside, but when the space came available as well, we just said, we need this space. And because there's no space for Indigenous people. There's not a friendship center. There's not a space that we can say that it's Indigenous led here in Halton. And so we created this space here as well.
And I was looking at your website. He made the point that, here we are on the Milton Country Heritage. There was heritage properties, but there was no place within it of kind of recognizing the people who were here first, and the much longer history of Indigenous people in this region. So was it you two you two really drove this whole project?
That's right.
And got it going.
We both live in Halton,
mm-hmm.
and we found each other, through, as the awareness became in the community. It was, I showed up at one of the school board events. My children went to the public board, and I didn't really notice that much being done there. And then I met Sherry and just said, I want to support whatever it is you're doing, and how can we do that together? And I had my own thing in the community, connecting with my family and elders, and I was doing that just from a grassroots way. And then Sherry being in the school board, so it was let's do this together, because our teachings are that you don't do it together. You don't do anything for yourself before you do that for community, because it just doesn't work. And those are our teachings. So. This isn't just about us. It's about this collective. If we are feeling this, then other people must be. And that's through COVID. We built it online, much like you guys with your podcast, right? Like, people wanted to connect.
Let's branch off on that note. What's been the response that you found, not just here in Milton, but at Halton at large?
That's a loaded question in many ways, because Indigenous community members, there's a lot happening in the community. You have people that have never acknowledged that they've been Indigenous because it was a whole part of shame, or, don't tell anyone you're Indigenous, right? That's the pain of the truth. And then there's people that didn't know and found out when, the graves came to mainstream, and people realized, it was like the light bulb went on. Oh my gosh, that's why my family never talked about it. Or maybe that's, we were talking earlier about this, our generation, right? That was never talked about or taught in school. And so there was this awakening, right? For people to really say, like, whoa, so that's the people. But then there's also the bureaucracy.
So, you touched on a lot of notes there. I'm trying to break it down in my head. Let's talk about. I don't want to say it's the elephant in the room, but this is what topic I'm sure a lot of our listeners have in their mind is truth and reconciliation. It's June. We are in Indigenous Heritage Month, and I think for some of our listeners, the idea of truth and reconciliation is it's a more concept than a reality. It's to a lot of our listeners, no doubt this is more of a policy, pie in the sky idea. Wouldn't that be great? How do you view grandmother's voice, the role of making that more concrete, and bringing that reconciliation isn't something that's going to happen out west. It's not happening in Kamloops. It's happening here in Milton, here in the 905.
Mm-hmm. And Joel, I think you really touched on 2 key words: truth, reconciliation. Canadians have been lied to for a very, very long time, and we're just at the truth-telling stage. And sometimes the truth is really hard, and sometimes the truth really makes you angry, and sometimes the truth really ticks you off. But where do we go when we have those very difficult conversations to have? We have to have a safe place in order to have those difficult conversations. And we have to have it in community, because at the policy level, political level, federal level, it's happening at a different rate. It's only community that will accelerate it. When you talk about reconciliation, we go to reconciliation right away because that's an easier road than the truth-telling. Justice St. Clair, who is now a senator, said the truth will piss you off, and then you will get into reconciliation. We're not even at reconciliation yet within Canada, when we're still having people in Canada denying the fact that residential schools existed and that the uncovered graves are nothing but a bunch of lies. So we're still at the truth-telling stage before we can even get to reconciliation. Where we're sitting here today is true reconciliation. It is reconciliation at its finest here at Country Heritage Park. We were reached out to and to ask to take space and place, and we did so without anybody signing on the dotted line saying, you owe me X amount of dollars. The space was renovated for us. It was made for us without anybody asking, where's the check? And now the check is in the mail. One of the famous lies, right? But the check is actually in the mail. And we've been doing this work with a handshake for the last year. And now having that piece of reconciliation is here in Halton, that we're actually moving and we're having those difficult conversations, but we're also bringing community here. And like Jody said earlier, a community of love, because people want to have a place and space that they belong to, that they can have those conversations.
I maybe want to play devil's advocate here, because I know that there are critics who are listening to this podcast who are saying, you know, all this truth and reconciliation stuff, it's just performative nonsense. It's fluff. You know, how much longer do you have to beat us over the head with this before, you know, just their words not mine, get over it.
Stress of playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, I really do, because this is not my words. But, you know, like, how do you approach that? And there are people, there are allies who are listening who say, how do I reach that? How do I reach across the dinner table to somebody who's been brought up on those generations of lies? Say, we need a new path forward on this.
And your words of just get over it. We don't tell Jewish people to get over the Holocaust. We don't tell people from 9/11 to get over it, right? This is in our closet. And now that we're shaking out the rug and opening up the shutters, this is what's making Canadians feel uncomfortable. We're talking about people's fragility. They've been lied to, like I said. And Canadians have been lied to for a very, very long time. But now that the shutters have been open and the rug is being dusted off or shaken, right? It's kind of like it's shaking our core as well. Because we live in a country thinking that we are free, that we're safe, right? But only safe and free for certain individuals. We still have a huge problem when it comes to race and racism in this country. We know that people are treated differently in this country than other people, but we don't want to look at that in a critical way, right? But when it comes to Indigenous people, we've been given the education back in the day of subhuman. We're not human. And when we start looking at those kinds of topics and conversations and really looking at who we are as humans, I think that's a way to go through it. But when you're telling people to just get over it, that's really unfair. Can you tell my mom to just get over it because she was taken away from her family for 10 years and raised in a residential school? Can you tell me to just get over it even though I was raised and not with my family and I'm a 60 scoop kid? Right? People, these are real lives today that is happening in our country and in Halton.
And I guess that's why what you're doing is so important, because I always feel that the prejudice is it's much harder to maintain the minute you meet someone who's actually lived through it. And for most white European origin Canadians, we just never used to, consciously at least, meet First Nations people. And if we did, you're too polite to ask about what. So we're not communicating about that history. Plus, we all had our kind of comfortable, well, Canada's better than the USA kind of stuff, And yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful that you're here, so that so we don't have another generation of children who grow up not speaking firsthand to the people who went through these experiences. Now, I mean, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple of really, well, in particular, there was one article in the National Post. I can't remember the author's name, but it was particularly unpleasant, and basically denying the whole existence of the kind of children that are being uncovered in graveyards across Canada, basically saying, well, everybody knew they were there already, or as if that makes a difference. And what struck me was, if the residential schools had existed for however long they existed, 150 years, almost 200 years, and not a single child had died, they still would have been genocidal in their intent and what they were trying to do, because they were trying to extinguish a people and a culture. Now, they also managed to seem to kill an awful lot of children one way or another. What kind of, I don't see in the Halton School Board a whole load of graveyards next to schools. It's, I know I'm not the first person to say that, but yeah, that seems like a really important point, that it's like the schools are an atrocity even without the dead children, so this kind of taking us down that road of kind of a head count almost is a horrendous way. Now, I'm giving my own opinions. What's your take on all that, on this kind of kickback that you get against the what has emerged over the last few years?
The reality is that everyone is walking their own path with their own understandings. We've all come here in this one time, and the reality is that happened to the original people here. So even just you trying to get out what you're saying to us, makes me even uncomfortable in this chair. You have a hard time talking about it, but the fact that anybody would even try to justify that means that person has their own trauma. And the reality of COVID and where we are today is that we all now have trauma, and there's so much more than just this, and I call this surface conversation, because we're guided by some of the most amazing elders in this country who have stepped from their responsibilities in their own community to come into Halton because they believe that we're doing something that doesn't exist anywhere. And the realities are that the Truth and Reconciliation is a mandate by the government, because we are a country of education. We have to live a certain way, right? We're following this, bureaucracy, and the people that probably have these comments follow the bureaucracy. And you've made me uncomfortable. I was comfortable living off stolen land and, raped women and missing children and killed people. And now you're telling me that I have to admit that I'm living on stolen land, and what I own and worked hard for is not mine. So that's the reality. But what our reality is in Halton is we have the most humble Indigenous people that live around the corner that believe that our ancestors, the ones that have traveled on before us, actually are guiding all of this and guiding all of us. And so, to even, we're in this every day. So to even think that people are still stuck in that space of, I've never heard of this or whatever. We're like, are you kidding me? Right? You just don't want to.
It's so frustrating. And I mean,
sorry, I want to just cut in for a second, because I kind of want to shift gears, because I want to ask you, the work that you're doing here, like the day-to-day work that you're doing with Grandmother's Voice. Can you touch in a bit on that your philosophy and just how trying to make that connection between philosophy and action. And I don't know, Jody or Sherry.
You know what, Sherry? We laugh about this every day because as much as we have a commitment to the Catholic School Board, right? And how they govern themselves is our responsibility in that position. But we wake up every day. We do what we have to do with the school board because that's, our job. But when community comes, we wait to see what happens. We have our plans. We follow the calendar. We do events. We invite people in. But when people reach out to us, and it could be somebody from a shelter, somebody from that just says, hey, I just found out. It could be somebody working in Calgary saying, we see the work you're doing. It's amazing. We just are guided. We just wake up every day and we're so lucky for it. It's challenging because it's been a year and we haven't received government funding. We've been doing this all on relationship building.
You haven't received any funding from the federal government for any kind of
no, because they've actually we've had meetings with the MPs of Halton, and they actually told us, "Oh, this is too big of a role for you, but I can introduce you to a doctor that could maybe help you in Toronto." So we were just kind of sidestepped, right?
Yeah, because I always say that was racism. Hello,
yeah, I know, yeah.
Right?
I'm trying to. Sorry, you just blew my mind a bit. So you're telling me that basically we're in the midst of truth and reconciliation. Our federal government is big on truth and reconciliation. We're going to heal the divide that's been existing since the birth of Canada between the First Nations and those who colonized the land. And you're telling me that they gave you the same line that they would have given the Indian agents would have given the reservation back in 18 whatever.
Yeah, we haven't gone forward and applied for any federal funding. So we haven't received any federal funding because we haven't applied for federal funding.
Yeah.
Right. But we've also had conversations with our MPs to say, this is what we'd like to build. Can you give us some assistance? Help us not find the way, we know the way, but help us in a sense, right? But because we're not a First Nations organization and we're not listed as that or a corporation in that sense, they just kind of said, we'll support you, but we won't support you.
Yeah, I think that they're like everybody. Somebody said to me the other day, an elder actually said on one of our talks, they were like, the talk is where did you come from? Where all of a sudden grandmother's voice is national, right? We are. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, and this is, we're very spiritual. We are connected to the earth, to the spirit world. A lot of people, and we've actually injected that into our relationships and conversations. And as a woman, it is so empowering to know that we can sit and have conversations with corporations that we say, hey, let us work with you and help us build our community. So, in a sense, we have received funding because our concept from 4 years ago was sitting at the table with community organizations saying, hey, we know you have Indigenous money because you're doing Indigenous things.
Right.
So why don't you hire us women? We'll help collect and get the people together and you write the grants with us. But what was happening is Sherry would write grants to say like, hey, what are they called? Support grant, letters of whatever they are. And then we'd give them the letter to write for that grant, and then they'd never hire us. They'd use the money or bring somebody in from a different community because maybe they were men. Like that's a reality. Mm-hmm. That's a reality here in Halton is that our, community members from First Nations communities are being brought to tables to make decisions for our community, and the people in the community trying to build community are being overlooked. So we're guided. And when I say guided, the grandmas are like, you just keep doing what's right. It will happen. Mm-hmm. And the values of the Indigenous people and what our elders are teaching us is what's gotten us here.
And so you have this kind of grassroots bridge building between settler community and the First Nations that's happening at the grassroots level. I mean, this is kind of like this is the kind of stuff that you want to see like for long-term growth. And I'm trying to bring the conversation back to something we mentioned off before we hit recording, is that you were mentioning how you were looking. Well, for those, I should back up a moment for our podcast listeners who can't see this, but Jody is dressed like she just came in from outside because she was working on the community garden, helping to. Jody, just tell us quickly what you were doing in the community garden, because I thought that was really impressive when you came in.
Oh, all sweaty and dirty.
You don't have to describe in detail.
Well, anyway, that's what I was, because it's 100 degrees out. But thanks for asking. We have some really amazing non-Indigenous cousins, we call them, that have helped us really put some things in place here at Country Heritage Park. And I was in the back garden, following her direction. But we've planted 3 sisters gardens. We're trying to refurbish the soil. There wasn't a lot of minerals. We've been doing, but anyway, today I was watering by hand. Mm-hmm. Like 4 rows, like 40 feet long, and we don't have the proper tools.
Right.
Country Heritage Park provides us whatever we can, but they run their business here, and so we're working really hard, but we're trusting.
And there's something on that note. Sherry was mentioning about how you're working on not a 5-year plan, and you weren't working on a 10-year or even a 20-year plan. She told me she was working on a 7-generation plan. And I want to emphasize that's generation with a G, which for some of our listeners, they're saying that's a long timeline. And Sherry, I wanted maybe if you could just kind of elaborate on that philosophy for us or for our listeners, because I think some of our listeners right now, they're parking their cars and going, what are you doing? Are you a mad woman?
Yeah. And, prior to colonization, that's how we would look at things. And then the nations, the 200 million people that were here prior to colonization, they would look at things for 7 generations. The decisions that they're making now, how is it going to affect 7 generations down the road? We know that certain things that we do today will definitely impede and prevent certain things from happening 7 generations down the road. And we're in a climate crisis. If we were really thinking about 7 generations ahead, we wouldn't be in a climate crisis. Mm-hmm. We would be thinking about how our actions are going to affect people down the road. When I have children, I don't have grandchildren yet, but I certainly will know when I'm making those decisions how my decisions are going to affect 7 generations ahead. We would think a little bit longer, we would counsel a little bit longer, and we wouldn't make rash decisions based on the physical responsibility that we have to get our money spent and those decisions made by March 31st. Mm-hmm. We're not guided by the money, we're guided by humility, and we're guided by human nature, again, the planet we don't need the planet. The planet doesn't need us, sorry. We need the planet more than that. And so we wouldn't, if we're thinking about 7 generations ahead, we wouldn't have dirty water. List goes on, right?
And it's that kind of, I think, when you kind of bring it back to that truth and reconciliation aspect, and you're talking about just at the truth part, I think white people are viewing the whole discussion with truth and reconciliation as like, well, okay, we know bad stuff happened. Okay, how do we fix it? Can we throw some money at it? Can we pass some laws? Can we change some policies? And I think that's kind of the core, like the disconnect that we're having, is that if our First Nations partners are having a 7-generation timeline that they're envisioning things, and we're stuck on, I have so much money left in this fiscal quarter that I need to spend. We're not simpatico. We're not going to meet that. We're not going to come together. And maybe that's, we need to find a way to change our mentality. Again, coming back to that grassroots of we need to start build something new from the ground up here.
What we really, the foundation of Indigenous people, and this is what I love to share is that they're all about relationship. Every single thing. So, my background being an entrepreneur, business owner for a long time, the idea is, if you have money, we'll put it to use, but we don't just want your money. We want your commitment. So, Sherry and I will meet with organizations and say, like, what do you need? Do you need education? What do you need? Because we need you to come along with us. So, we've built this based off of our, not just us. We now have community members from Oakville, Burlington, Halton Hills, Milton, and they are showing up and going out to organizations and showing up at the table. They've never been, their ancestors have never been at these tables. And, and really, some of the tables just need to leave, break down, right? Some of these tables shouldn't even exist anymore, right?
Well, I mean, I really like, whether by design or whatever, the fact that you are kind of doing it your own way, and rather than through the approved channel, so to speak, or if you apply for a grant because you're being approved by the system that created this, all the problems.
Exactly what the grandma said.
And as someone, I don't have a huge amount of experience working with government, but we've both had a fair amount of experience working with politicians. There's so many good intentions that just do not, that stifle
for sure
innovation and just getting things done.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating all the time. And it's, I think the approach you've taken is really a breath of fresh air, and I hope it really takes off. But
it already has.
Yeah.
Right now we're just deciding. We have to at some point decide the structure, right, and how all of our relationships that have come forward to support us, the Catholic Board, the Country Heritage Park, our community members, IKEA, like we're really connecting with organizations and people in the organizations, because through reconciliation, just the idea and how we share the concept when we're talking to people that are like, it's TRC, let's get it done, whatever. It's a mandate. It's roadmap, they say, right? This tells you where you fit into these 94 calls to action. Are you here? Are you here? Are you here? And if you work or live in those spaces, then this is how you act. For us, we're just like, figure out where you fit in it. We fit in somewhere. And so it's really just about supporting the people and how can we do this together? But we're just building it in that way that, I don't know. Did I lost
No, I think, and then you're right, like just building it on what the community wants without having that government interference, because both of you have already said that you've had experience working with political organizations or even in that field. And that everybody has good intentions at the very beginning. That's why they run to be politicians. But when they get into that space and place, they're having to toe the party line. And if they don't toe the party line, they get chastised or kicked out. And so it's one of those things that, we've seen all that and happening. So what we're seeing is that we see that community wants this. We're just a vehicle for community.
Yeah.
And community wants this, that anybody is more than welcome to come to Country Heritage Park. You don't need an invitation to come through the garden. You don't need an invitation to come in here at all either. We're here. Somebody's always here Monday to Friday. And you don't need an invitation if you just want to come and be in this room that we're all sitting in and look at our beautiful carpet. And which, by the way, has 7 grandfather teachings, just so that you know. And but even just going out in the garden and being in that space and place in the garden, and more people are asking, can we come up to the garden? I have my relative that's in. Can we come and have a picnic? Before our full moon ceremony for the strawberry moon the other night, there was families that came here for a picnic, and it was just so beautiful to see. And then we know that is meant for them. We know that our mental health has really taken a toll for COVID. But we have space. There's land out here that you can put your feet on, that we're rejuvenating the soil in the back 40 to be able to have a seed school, to be able to have talks about food sovereignty and food security, to let kids know that they've got a safe place to come to in order to learn about growing plants. We have a whole week here, Education Week, Indigenous Education Week with our school board in grade 5, that Grandma Wanda and her sons are teaching kids the importance of the corn, beans, and squash. And they all sang a song before they even left with their seeds. And kids see this, right? And they see that Indigenous people are, they're here and we are alive and we're wanting to teach.
Look like
and
they look
right.
They look like and they look white.
Yeah.
Right? They look brown. They look just like us. And I think that's another piece too, where that's the challenging part for a lot of people. They just have it in their mind that they look a certain way. And, and I think that's always been a part of my own journey, is that, you don't look Indigenous enough. And what exactly, like, I actually don't compared to the rest of my family. And maybe that's why I got this role. Maybe this is why it's my responsibility, because I don't need to validate myself. I went through a long time in my life always knowing I was Indigenous, and then having to validate myself to Indigenous people and to non-Indigenous people. And I'm at that place now that, I just have to do and be. Mm-hmm. But I feel like, if you don't mind, I'd like to just talk about that, why people are coming to the garden, because, we always stop and acknowledge our elders that have been supporting us, because, they don't have to do this. They have their own communities that they still support, but they say it's their responsibility to share this knowledge, to share it with not just their community, but all people. This is all people, not just Indigenous people. And so when we were told that we, would come and plant this garden here, they came. There were like 5, 6 of them more that showed up and said, let's do ceremony for you, right? Let's let and they came in here and they said, we need to be here. We see our ancestors. We feel the energy. The historical site. We haven't even gotten into the history of Country Heritage Park. Forget that, right? We just knew it. And so they did ceremony, and we didn't just do it one time. We've done it so many times in the garden. And so, we just have to honor the belief system of Indigenous people, that we're spiritually connected, and that was never allowed to be talked about in society unless you were in a church talking about it through religion, and that's just not the reality. We all know we have spirit. We all know that if we didn't have spirit, we would be incomplete. And so we really believe that another part of what we offer is that healing understanding, and that everyone, needs to really understand that it was the Indigenous values that were here for that, and that was the power that was seen. And sometimes it sounds hokey pokey to people that are all like into bureaucracy and in their head, but it's through COVID that we realize that we need to get out of our head and into our heart.
It seems like in so many things these days, it's not between left and right necessarily anymore. We were talking about this the other day as well. It's more, there are people who just want to be left alone and not be challenged to think about difficult things that might make life more difficult. Or maybe I shouldn't be driving this particular type of car, or maybe I could spend a bit of money and have less of an impact on the environment, or a million other things. And I think there's just a lot of people who just I don't want to think about it, leave me alone. And truth and reconciliation is and suddenly saying that history you were taught at school, that's 90% BS. Is a real you're asking people to think, and they just hate it.
But you know what that is too from our elders, is that's grief, trauma, right? That's intergenerational trauma that we all carry. We have no idea. How did we get here today? We're like survival. We've been in survival mode for generations, a century. And this is the way that Indigenous elders say, they're awake right now. And we were told through prophecies that it's our time right now. And I like to think I'm a pretty mainstream person. I'm listening to these elders and I'm like, okay, that's cool. Okay, let's bring this to people, because people want it. They want to heal. They want to do what's right. And the ones that don't, well, they're on their own path. And at some point in time, they'll either realize it or they'll take it with them, in the next time. So I really do believe that we're just in a time of realization, awakening to how we got here today. Because I can tell you, I think, before, when I woke up 20 years ago, I was like, how did I get here?
Right.
And every day now has been intentional.
I was just going to say, I think I was just looking at my watch. I think we're coming up on our episode time limit. But I I want to thank both you, Jody and Sherry, for having Roll and myself come up here to see your fantastic digs and what you're doing here. I think that this is a conversation that clearly we can have. We've touched on a lot of notes on this one, and we're probably going to open up a lot of doors for us to walk through in future episodes. So I can say for all of our listeners here at the 905, we wish you all the best in many years to come, and we look forward to see what the next bend around the path has for you here at Grandmother's Voice. So thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.